They walked into a room full of people. They found you, not by accident, not by chance. There was a system, and once you understand it, the shame dissolves, because the traits that made you a target are not your weakness. They are your signature. And there are people who have spent their entire lives learning to read that signature from across a room. This episode is about exactly that system. What dark personalities scan for. Why high empathy is not a flaw, it is the door. And what it means that you were chosen at all. In episode 5 of this series, we looked at what happens when narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy combine in a single person. We saw that a person with those 3 traits has a measurable empathy deficit, a strategic orientation toward other people, and a near-complete absence of guilt as a brake on their behavior. The question that episode closed on was this: how does someone like that walk into an ordinary room and find a target so quickly, when the rest of us are simply living our lives? The answer begins with a finding from researchers Jonason and Webster, who in 2012 documented what they called the Dark Triad's exploitative social style. Their data showed that high Dark Triad scorers are not randomly social. They are selectively social. They scan, they assess, and they move with deliberate precision toward specific people, while appearing entirely relaxed while doing it. This is not predatory in the theatrical sense. There is no dramatic tension in the room. It looks like someone becoming interested in you, because on the surface, it is. Picture a work event, open bar, the kind where people move around the room in loose clusters, making small talk about nothing. Someone with high Dark Triad traits is at this event. They're not standing at the edge. They're moving, listening at the surface, but measuring underneath. 2 minutes with one person, 3 with another, a polite exit. Then they land next to you. What are they measuring? Research by clinical psychologist Dr. Ramani Durvasula identifies several traits that dark personalities consistently move toward. High conscientiousness, the person who follows through, who does what they say, who holds themselves to a standard. High agreeableness, the person who seeks to resolve conflict rather than escalate it, who gives others the benefit of the doubt. And what psychologists call communal orientation, a genuine investment in the well-being of others. These are not random. They are strategic inputs. A conscientious person will cover for them. An agreeable person will not escalate confrontations. A communally oriented person will prioritize the relationship over their own discomfort. Every single one of those traits is useful to a person who views relationships as resource systems. If you have ever been described as reliable, as warm, as the person people come to, you have worn all 3. But there is one trait that sits above all the others. Imagine someone tells you a story about a difficult childhood, a parent who was absent, a relationship that left them hollow. They tell it quietly, not performing, just disclosing, and something in you responds, not with pity, exactly, with recognition, with the impulse to be the person who is different. That response is empathy, and it is the door. Here is what the research shows, and this is the line that changes how you understand everything that followed. Empathy is not a flaw in the person who has it. It is a resource in the hands of someone who doesn't. In a 2014 study published in the journal Personality and Individual Differences, researchers Y and Tiliopoulos found that Dark Triad individuals specifically exploit empathic responsiveness, the tendency of high empathy people to extend understanding, to imagine the other person's inner world, to give the benefit of the doubt in the presence of apparent pain. The targeting is not random. It is calibrated. They are looking for someone who will feel what they describe, because a person who feels what you describe will also feel responsible for your pain. And a person who feels responsible for your pain is a person you can move. You were not naive. You were responding correctly to the signal they deliberately sent. The manipulation began before you had any reason to know there was a manipulation. There is a second scan that happens, usually in the first weeks, sometimes the first days. Picture this. They do something that bothers you. Nothing dramatic. They cancel last minute. They say something slightly unkind and then laugh it off. They don't follow through on something small. You notice. You mention it. Carefully, because you don't want to overreact. And then you watch what happens next. If they apologize immediately and sincerely, the test ends there. Most people aren't running this dynamic. But for a dark triad individual, this moment is data collection. What they are watching for is whether you will let it go, whether you will accept a thin explanation, whether your desire to preserve the good feeling is stronger than your instinct that something was wrong. Psychologist Robert Hare, whose psychopathy checklist remains the most widely used diagnostic tool in forensic psychology, documented this pattern extensively. The early probing behaviors that test a target's threshold before escalation begins. He described it as a calibration process, not malicious in appearance, just watching to see what you'll absorb. The people who passed this test, who pushed back, who set a limit, who said, "That's not okay with me," were often quietly dropped. Too much friction, not worth the investment. The people who absorbed it, who softened it, who told themselves it wasn't a big deal, they passed the test, and they didn't know they were being tested. If you've ever been told you're too forgiving your whole life, you weren't flawed. You were exactly what someone with no conscience learns to find. Here is what all of this means, and this is the part that matters most. The traits that made you a target are not liabilities. They are human qualities that function correctly in relationships with other humans who have a conscience. High empathy produces deep connection with people who are genuinely there. Conscientiousness produces trust with people who value it. The willingness to give second chances produces repair with people who are actually trying. You were not broken. You were operating correctly. You were placed in contact with someone who had learned to read those qualities as entry points. And that is a statement about their pathology, not your failure. You're allowed to grieve the relationship and still recognize that it was engineered. Both things can be true. Now, 3 things you can do with this understanding, starting today. First, reframe what happened. What you are carrying as shame, "I should have seen it," is actually evidence of their sophistication. The targeting system exists precisely because it is invisible to the people inside it. You were not blind, you were normal. Second, learn the conscience test. When someone in your life does something that bothers you, pay attention to what happens when you name it. Not whether they apologize, but how they respond to the discomfort of being accountable. That response is data. Third, recognize that your empathy, intact and directed toward people who can receive it honestly, remains one of the most powerful relational tools you have. The goal is not to become less. It is to become more precise about where that quality goes. A note on safety. If you are still inside a relationship where naming any of this could put you at risk, professionally, financially, or personally, your safety comes first. None of this replaces a conversation with a qualified professional who can help you assess and plan with full context. Being chosen was never the problem. Being chosen by that particular person was. But here is the question this episode doesn't fully answer. You understand the targeting now. You understand why you were chosen and what they were scanning for. You understand that your empathy was the door, not the flaw. What happens when you begin to close that door? Deliberately, without becoming someone else? There is a set of specific psychological defenses that research shows are effective against dark triad targeting. Not armor that shuts people out. Precision, the ability to extend trust slowly, to read the conscience test in real time, to recognize the calibration phase before it completes. That is what episode 7 is about. The defended mind. Not a harder version of you, a sharper one. You already know what they look for. Next, you'll know what they can't get through. It never looked like danger. That's exactly what made it dangerous. Dark personas. The psychology of power, manipulation, and human darkness, explained so you are never caught off guard again.